My parents prepared funds for my sister, but made me take out loans and painted me as the villain. I was 25 years old at the time, and my sister Flora was 19. She was always like a little princess to our family. She was supposed to graduate from high school a year ago, but unfortunately, that did not happen. It wasn't that the high school expelled her, rather, due to her very low grades and admission standards, she decided to drop out on her own. Last year, she chose to continue with the band activities she had started with friends 2 years prior, pursuing her only passion, music. It seemed to be going well, but honestly, we all felt it was just a fleeting dream. Everyone thought it was reckless to chase this dream at the cost of quitting high school, but being a full-time rock star myself, I didn't feel it was my place to blame her, so I said nothing. Moreover, I thought Flora wouldn't appreciate me meddling in her life. Ironically, the very people who should have warned her against such a rash choice encouraged her to quit high school and perform as a musician with her band members. Her singing ability was at best a hobby level, nothing more. In fact, the other band members were relatively skilled, but honestly, it's hard to understand why she was part of that group. Within 6 months, she and the other 5 band members also quit high school to devote themselves to music. But at that point, Flora was ousted from the group. The reason was simple: the band members had found a far superior vocalist who could even write original lyrics. She returned to her hometown degreeless and with no future prospects, trying to form her own band, but no one agreed. After all, none of her friends were musicians, nor were they imprudent enough to throw away their own lives and plans to go along with her whims. After being kicked out of the band, she neither found a job nor is currently living on financial support from our parents at home. It's strange that our parents could accept this. It seems they think she should take a break for a while because of the great setbacks she experienced. However, I believe this is merely the result of her own choices. I feel neither sympathy nor pity for her. She should have realistically assessed her abilities as a singer. Additionally, the relationship with the band she was in during high school wasn't that deep since the other members were already close friends before she joined, which is only natural. Moreover, the fact that she continues to live at home without any burden feels very unfair. Despite being a fully grown adult, it's clear that our parents are financially supporting her. The reason I feel this is particularly unfair is that I was told it was time for me to be independent immediately after graduating from high school. When I went to college, I also had to figure out how to cover the expenses myself. I knew that my parents had let Flora attend high school without even making her pay the fees. Therefore, I never expected to be treated specially from the beginning, but seeing her current treatment, I can't help but feel dissatisfied. From a young age, I realized that my parents clearly had a favorite, and realizing it wasn't me, I decided to take out student loans and prepare to work to cover my high school expenses myself. However, when I learned that Flora dropped out of high school and continued to live at our parents' house without needing to work, as they continued to support her financially, my sense of injustice grew. She always just made excuses to avoid work, and never actually took action. Yet, considering how lenient my parents were with her while being strict with me, I felt a clear disparity. With this frustration, I finally confronted my parents about these feelings. We argued about this matter repeatedly, but my parents always appealed to my emotions and tried to push through their own views. Thus, deciding to cut ties with them was incredibly difficult. However, about a week ago, my parents caused an incident that clearly signaled a break for me, and I finally resolved to sever our relationship. Last week, I asked my parents to attend my wedding scheduled a few months later. The venue is just a 2-hour drive from my home, easily accessible for them. Yet they began to hesitate to participate, making excuses about having work. I found this puzzling because taking a day off work to attend a daughter's wedding should be entirely feasible. When I pressed on this issue, it led to an argument. Eventually, they revealed the real reason for their refusal. It was because they had planned a party for my sister. Coincidentally, my wedding day overlapped with the day Flora was supposed to graduate from high school. 8 months ago, she had dropped out of high school, and had been quite depressed recently. To comfort her, my parents chose to prioritize an event for her over my wedding. They planned a party for her to lift her spirits, though she was not yet informed about it. Thus, I assumed they would postpone their plans and choose to attend my wedding instead. I believed this to be the logical and reasonable thing to do. However, they said to me, "We hope you understand why we cannot attend your wedding and why we need to dedicate that day to Flora." I was shocked that they were serious about missing my wedding, especially for an unnecessary party for an adult sister. Flora faces the consequences of her choices and must accept them. Meanwhile, I couldn't accept my parents' judgment, and already troubled by our relationship, I became emotional over the phone. I accused my parents of always prioritizing Flora and disregarding my presence. Furthermore, I pointed out that by indulging her without seriously considering her future, they continued to deprive her of growth opportunities. As a result, I felt alienated from my parents and told them I could never trust them again. I even said, "Your approach shows that you have failed in fulfilling your responsibilities as parents." But they showed no signs of apology and dismissed me, saying, "It's your wedding, you're just being too emotional." I even thought I wouldn't mind if my parents weren't there, because it was clear that Flora needed their help. Feeling there was no point in discussing further, I hung up and contacted my grandparents, asking my grandfather to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. My maternal grandparents live out of state and are somewhat distant, but I have a relatively close relationship with my paternal grandparents. They once helped me when I was taking out student loans, even acting as guarantors. For me, who couldn't rely on my parents, their support was incredibly reassuring. My grandparents have long understood the strained relations between me and my parents and the unfair treatment towards me and Flora, and they sympathized with my position. They have often tried to advise my father that his treatment of his children was unhealthy and not equitable, but it seems it never resonated with my parents. For me, the fact that my grandparents spoke up on my behalf meant more than anything else. Therefore, it was natural for me to want them to come to the wedding if my parents would not attend. I called my grandparents and honestly explained the entire current situation. As I spoke, I became emotional and eventually broke down crying. My grandparents seemed to sense how hurt I was and began to apologize for the disappointment caused by my parents' actions. I repeatedly told them, "This is not your fault." But it was clear that my grandparents were deeply pained by my situation. Afterward, they promised they would definitely attend the wedding. Not only that, but they had been trying to convince my parents of their responsibilities towards my suffering, not just now, but over many years. It was clear even over the phone that my grandparents were seriously angry. I tried to ask what they were planning to do, but my grandparents said, "You'll understand in time," and did not provide any details. Therefore, I didn't know what my grandfather intended to do until he told me. That night, after 1 a.m., I received a phone call. The caller was my father, who started yelling at me as soon as I answered. "You are self-centered and unreasonable, making a fuss about everything," he said. I couldn't understand what he meant by those words. Since I couldn't grasp what had happened, I asked my father to calm down and explain the situation. At first, he refused to believe my words and insisted that I was just pretending to be innocent. However, a few hours later, he finally told me that my grandparents had gone to their house after I had called them. They had a direct conversation, but it didn't go well. Apparently, my grandparents called my parents the worst leeches and called Flora a stupid, lazy cow. The words were a bit harsh, but I could understand my grandparents' argument to some extent. Since Flora dropped out of high school, my parents could only support her each month thanks to my grandparents. My grandfather owns a private business and is considerably wealthier than my father, who occasionally relied on my grandfather's money. Therefore, my grandfather finally made a decision. He must have been unable to tolerate it any longer. My father said that Flora was looking for a job but couldn't find one that matched her conditions, which was completely false. I know for a fact that Flora wasn't actually looking for work because every time I came home, she was always lounging at home or going out drinking with friends. She had no interest in working or having a job. My parents knew this and didn't see it as a problem, but my father must have lied to my grandparents because he thought they wouldn't accept it. After talking with me, it seems my grandparents decided they no longer needed to tolerate the situation. They must have realized before me that Flora had no intention of looking for a job, was completely reliant on my parents, and felt no pressure to do anything in particular. She was completely untroubled by living off others' support and was satisfied with it. While talking with my grandparents, they knew Flora had no intention of getting a job, but they thought it was strange that she hadn't found work after nearly a year. Still, they said they had been sending money to my parents every month to support her. She is their granddaughter, and they didn't want my parents to struggle because of her. However, my father told me on the phone that my grandparents had come to my parents' house, put an end to this situation, and said they would stop supporting my parents from now on. And he told me that it was my fault for making a big fuss to my grandparents about my parents not attending the wedding, and asked me to talk to them to resolve the matter. Afterward, I heard from my father that from now on, instead of sending money to my parents, the grandparents planned to send it to me. Upon hearing this, I immediately hung up the phone with my father and called my grandparents to understand the situation. My grandparents responded promptly, and when I asked if it was true they would be sending money every month, they confirmed it was indeed true and explained it was meant to compensate for my past hardships. They said that since I had struggled enough, I should live comfortably after my marriage, and it was up to me how to use the money. Their reason for wanting to support me was that they believed it was important to support the right person. On the other hand, it seemed Flora had also tried to contact me, but seeing my phone filled with messages and missed calls the next morning, I felt a strong desire not to interact with them and decided to block all their contacts. All they wanted to say was that they wanted the current problem resolved. It seemed I was considered unreasonable. It was clear they needed more support than I did. Yet, I rejected their request. I had no intention of apologizing. As I talked with my friends, my belief that I was not wrong only grew stronger. Because I find it very difficult to hold on to anger or resentment, I quickly started to think about something else. However, it took quite some time to realize there is a clear difference between harboring resentment and standing up to protect oneself. My parents' love for me was very calculated, and I can clearly feel that now. But that does not mean I will act accordingly. If I do, they could call on me whenever and wherever they liked. They might want that, but it means nothing to me now. In the end, although my parents may not attend the wedding, I am satisfied that my grandparents will attend and that people who truly love me will be there. With great advice received and reassured that I was doing the right thing, I felt no guilt and was no longer trampled upon by my parents. It turned out to be a good result for me, and having gained the courage to talk about my broken family relations to others, I think there is no turning back now. I will not let anyone trample on me anymore. Afterwards, following what my grandparents had said, my parents attended the wedding, but unfortunately, it was just a mess. We had lunch together at a nearby hotel, but I had told my parents beforehand to avoid any conversations that could lead to conflicts or problems. Because I was in a very calm mood at the time, I wanted to avoid seeing my parents. It didn't seem they intended to disrupt the mood, but still, my parents initiated the conversation and brought up the topic as soon as we sat down. They apologized repeatedly and said they really regretted how they had treated me before. Even Flora was sincerely apologizing. I could have accepted their story and given them another chance. However, before my grandparents could say anything, I expressed my gratitude for their apologies but felt the apologies were very insincere, given the circumstances, and I still could not truly trust them. It was unfortunate for me that if my grandparents had not stopped their support, my parents would not have realized their mistakes. But since they seemed to be truly reflecting and reconsidering how they treated me, I thought I might forgive the past events. As their child, I felt I should accept their apology. However, my parents used that as an excuse by saying that they always forgave me when I made mistakes as a child. I found that example so strange and amusing that I couldn't help but laugh. They were comparing the mistakes I made as a child to the ones they consciously made as adults and refused to acknowledge. I told them that ultimately they would be the ones betrayed, but I knew it had no effect on them, as I had experienced such situations for many years. In public, I said, "If you make me uncomfortable, I will immediately leave the place with my grandparents." Then they accused me of being heartless and said, "We intend to respond sincerely over these years," but I did not believe their words at all. Finally, I stood up and tried to leave the place. At that moment, I felt that I had achieved the resolution I really wanted. Furthermore, I felt very proud of myself. It was definitely a good day. Several days have passed since having lunch with my parents after the wedding. I told them I intended to cut off contact, but Flora started posting about me on social media. Because I had forgotten to block them on social media, I saw her posts. She was criticizing my attitude towards our parents. The content of the post was such that anyone who knows her could tell that she intended to cut me out of her life. I found that post very strange. I think my parents only did the bare minimum for me, but they did more for Flora, so I can understand why she felt that way. Most of the content about the disputes with my grandparents was also posted by her on social media and shared in a way that made her and my parents look like victims. I am trying to clarify the situation, but people who know us are very confused about which side to take. I hate that this issue has become public, but we have no other choice. Since we went to the same high school, we have many mutual acquaintances. Everything felt so unfair to me, so I plan to have no contact with them from now on. It has been 3 days since Flora posted on social media, and we have been arguing every day. Honestly, I am tired, but I was determined to keep fighting until she stopped. And I think that decision was not wrong. She was posting in defense of our parents, claiming they did the same things for me that they did for her, but that is completely untrue. She was claiming that she was not privileged and could not overcome those circumstances. It was very difficult for her to return to a normal life and give up her dreams. Furthermore, one of her ex-boyfriends contacted her and told her what the other band members had said. According to him, a girl who used to sing with them before high school had moved to New Zealand, so she was just filling in, and they never said they intended to continue with Flora. They always had their own thoughts, but Flora disregarded them and did not take them seriously. Her decision to drop out of high school was her own choice, but it can be said it was the wrong decision. Perhaps she twisted the story and omitted important facts to make herself appear as a victim, which might be why she did it. And the biggest lie was that she and our parents always said she had taken out student loans to pay for her high school tuition. However, that backfired. Now everyone knows the truth, and I have no intention of dealing with my family anymore. They have lied too many times, and I am tired of it. My grandparents think the same and plan to completely cut off my parents and Flora from their lives. I am shocked and angry, but it was what I wanted from my parents, and I am really glad I can now reveal the truth. This means I will not have to spend time with my parents in the future, and I am looking forward to living my own life from now on.